Samara, a recent release by TMG for 2 to 5 players, plays in a little under an hour, about an hour more if you have players prone to analysis paralysis. It is a simple game, and it is what I call a bare-bone Euro game. One of those Euro games that does the Euro thing and not much else. The Euro game idea, to me, being I invest resources to collect things that allow me to invest more and get more things. I turn resources into other resources, and if I do the turning resources into resources better than you, I'm gonna win at the end. And there are games that do that with other stuff, and games that do that quintessentially. Splendor is a perfect example of that. So to me, like a bare-bone Euro game is not necessarily a bad thing. And this is pretty much the same idea. You move around an area that is pretty much a sliding calendar, as you will see. You move your pieces there, you collect stuff, and thanks to the stuff that you can collect more stuff. And if you can do that more efficiently than other people, you win the game. So it's neither a good or a bad thing per se, it's just the way that the game is designed, economically around the heart of Eurogaming. Samara is precisely this. You have a group of workers, you move them along a track, and that will allow you to gain resources, and hopefully you'll be able to do that in a way that lets you win the game at the end. Let's take a closer look at Samara. The game is played on 2 boards, I should say 2 play areas. One is a board where you will place 2 types of tiles, building tiles and tool tiles. During the game, the players first will acquire tools, and then they will use those tools to acquire the buildings. Acquiring the buildings is what you're trying to do. Buildings are worth a number of victory points, printed there in the top right corner. And so during the game, the board will get depleted of tools and buildings, and the game is over when all buildings have been assigned, and at that point, the player with the highest total is the winner of the game. The second area of the board is this sliding calendar here that indicates the time that is, well, now, the now time, the pieces that are in the now band, or saying the band that is under the now indication, will get to act. You move them ahead, and then they will be active again when the band in which they land will become the now band. The basic idea during the game is that you will be moving your pieces ahead, starting with the piece which is the closest to the board in the now area. You will move them ahead, and that will allow them to get things from the column under which they land. So, for example, if I am there, I can get something in that column. The row in which the tile that I'm trying to get is indicates how many people I need to have there to perform the action. So with A1, I would be able to take something here. We'll explain later if that is the case. In this case, that's not true, but we'll see later why. And for example, if I land in that area with these 3 pieces, then I have a strength of 3, they count as 3 workers, and I could get this tile here, or this tile here, or this tile here. When you do not have tools, all that you can get is tools. And you need usually pairs of tools very often, as you can see from the requirements of the buildings, and tools have different levels of difficulty when it comes to acquire them. Saws, you can always get a saw. All saws are born equal. I can get this saw and then that saw, or this saw and that saw is exactly the same. Trowels are a little trickier. There are 2 types of trowels. Some are with a square and some with a compass. If you want 2 trowels, you have to have a square trowel and a compass. You cannot have 2 squares or 2 compasses. So it's a little trickier. The same for glass works. You also need two types. So there is a type A and a type B. So you cannot have 2 A's or 2 B's. You have to have an A and a B. And you have to acquire them in order. You have to acquire a glass tool A before you can acquire the B. So in this case, for example, I come here, suppose I don't have any tools, I would be able to acquire any tool here or here. And suppose that I decide that I want this trowel here, I take it, I place it in my play area, and now I have it. Later, maybe I get this one here, later again I get the other trowel, and I get stuff. This is why I said earlier that you could not do anything there if you just landed with that character, because this is a building, and it's a building that requires stuff. But if I do land there and I have a glass tool and a trowel, then I'm able to build that. And so I simply acquire the tile. I do not spend my tools. I simply need to show that I have them. Later, suppose another player moves her characters there. Again, that is a force work of 3, and suppose that she has the right tools and she decides to take that building. So players will jump ahead and do stuff, and these two guys working together take that trowel, for example. These two people will go here, and I have enough tools, and I take that one. With a 2, I can take that one, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, after a while, the calendar board, or say the calendar area, which is made of 3 boards, will look a little bit like this. When the now is empty, you slide down the calendar until there are some pieces in the now. Right now is the green player's turn, and the green player can move her pieces together or separately. And suppose she wants to move them together. She really wants to get that tile there, and she has the right tools, and she gets that tile. And then we slide down. Now it is red. And red maybe just wants to get here. When you go to a place, you get as close to the board as possible, as leftmost as possible. If there are other players, again, you get the leftmost space next to them. So if I'm the first player to land in an area, I get there. If I'm the second player, I get there. So we simply get area after area, we resolve, we jump people ahead, and people get stuff. And if there are multiple players in an area, we start with the closest to the board and then the others in order. And of course, when a tile becomes obsolete, it goes to the other side. And so you have this sort of like endless road here. I like the fact that the turn order is not pre-established. It all depends on the type of actions that you're taking. The further you go, the longer it will be before your pieces will activate again. See, theoretically, that means how long it takes for you to develop a certain thing. But say to build this thing, to build the prison, it may take you several months if you start from there, only 1 month you start from there. So that is not very thematic. It just, actually, the less time you allocate to something, the easier and faster you build it, so which is kind of like strange. But the strategy is find the balance between the things that you want to find, you want to get, and of course not getting so much ahead that then it takes you too long before you get to activate again. Again, pieces that are together this way, next to one another, they count as a single piece. They count as a worker with a strength of 2. This counts for all intents and purposes as the same as this configuration as 2 individual workers. It is just that you have to move them together. As you can see, by the way, these are not great workers, not game pieces for this. Small, short, chubbier meeples would have been much better because they don't fall nearly as much. These guys fall very easily. Luckily enough, the women pieces don't. We have, the women. Women also important because of another thing that they can do. Instead of moving a woman ahead to get stuff, you can move a woman to the furthest pinkish or purplish band on the board, and that woman allows you to then deploy another figure. You start the game with 3 workers on the board and 2 more that you can add. So she won't activate for a while, but she brings another worker there. Are we supposed to understand that this woman just had a baby and that baby immediately is able to build castles and to build buildings. Well, I mean, what is she, an Okampa? That seems strange to me. I see this as women are better at creating social nets than men, and so she goes around and makes connections and recruits people, and now you have more people in your workforce. Otherwise, that doesn't make any sense to me. Another thing that you can do when you move ahead is to move ahead without doing anything, without getting the worker to do anything. You're simply forming groups, because then later when the time comes, you can move them all together and get bigger stuff. And in particular, if you want the stuff that is ahead up there on top, you need 4 workers, so there can be a lot of work. You need to plan ahead. By the way, it's not necessary, it doesn't say mean that the thing ahead there will be worth a lot, because the tiles are shuffled and placed randomly on the board. So great variety, but sometimes the board may end up being set up in a bit of a messy way. That is, the really good stuff is easy to get, and then the stuff that is hard to get is not all that interesting. So the second part of the game is not as exciting as the first. This is in essence the game. Move ahead, jump ahead, try not to get stuck in positions where it will take you forever before you activate again. Move ahead, get stuff, tools first, building tiles later, collect tiles, and at the end of the game you count points that are generated by tiles. Also, some tiles have special abilities that will allow you to do stuff. This one strengthens one of your people. There are other things that give you different types of benefits. Certain buildings give you disadvantages. For example, consume your tools. You have to discard the tool after you collect that building. So different type of buildings will add a little bit of variety based on that. The prison will damage the other players by sending them ahead by 5 months. This incredibly powerful tool is not worth anything in terms of points. I mean, not much, but still very powerful there. There's a balance between good effects and fewer victory points, a lot of points and no effects or even negative effects. But still, there's the idea. Move ahead, collect stuff, tools, and then buildings. Continue like this until the building board is depleted. At the point you count victory points, and that decides who the winner of the game is. So I have a couple of quibbles about the production. Those meeples, too tall and thin. There is a reason why traditional meeple are shorter, chubbier, and deeper. It's not just because there's a certain body image that they want to project, but because it's very practical. They tend not to fall. On top of that, these meeples are gonna stand on a sliding board, and so that increases the chances that they will fall off all the time. Only the women will stand at the end. It's a beautiful image, but the overall experience is not very practical. The tiles representing the tools are not very easy to tell apart. They're very small, and when they are placed on that quilt of other building tiles, they're not necessarily very easy to tell apart. You have red buildings with a red trowel on top of it. That is not ideal. I wish that the colors of the tools never match the background of the tiles on which they may end up being, because that makes the play area much less readable. So there are all these elements that just get in the way of gameplay. The material aspects of a game, of a board game, if the games were produced, only gives you pleasure, the pleasure of manipulating nice components, beautiful crafted elements. It should not get in the way of gameplay, only enhance gameplay. Speaking of gameplay itself, I like the idea of the calendar a lot. I like the challenge of having to figure out the trade-off that you have there. There's the great thing that I want to get, but if I don't go now, somebody else may take it from me. But if I jump all the way ahead now and I get it, then I'm not gonna be able to go and play for a while. So it's an interesting element in terms of gameplay, of the decisions that you have to make. The negative aspect is, of course, that if you make a mistake there, it's not just that it reduces your chances of winning the game, which is, it should be, that's what it should be. A bad decision pushes you further from victory, but it also increases downtime. because again, not the problem is that now I'm sitting here for like 10 minutes or so as other players are taking a bunch of short turns, which is perfectly possible, especially with a high count of players, 4 or 5 players. I haven't played it with 5, 4 is the maximum I played it with. I'm not planning or playing it with 5 because then I'm afraid that the downtime would be too much. And analysis paralysis, again, can be a problem. True, you can choose how much downtime you want to have, but then, of course, if everybody's doing the same thing and just jumping 1 month ahead, then the game becomes very trivial. So there is that problem. The danger of analysis paralysis is definitely there because, after all, this is a game with no luck. When the initial placement has been done, and that also affects everybody equally, and then there is the initial order of the players, but after that there is no randoms whatsoever, no secret information, so allows if you have a player that wants to optimize the gameplay, that player is going to be a pain in the neck and is going to ruin the fun for everybody through analysis paralysis and downtime that results from that. As for gameplay itself, again, I like the idea, I like the potential that it brings, but then when I actually played the game, I had the feeling almost like you see a juicy, delicious cheeseburgers, you bite into it, and it turns out that you're eating the tofu imitation, which can still be pretty flavorful, can be perfectly fine, but is not nearly as delicious and exciting as you thought it'd be. At the end of the day, this game turned out to be okay, and I expected to like it more than I would. That simple idea, and I like, again, simple Euro games where you go and get stuff and you invest that to get more stuff. I like to have that without many complications. I like elegant engines. Again, I mentioned Splendor, and Splendor to me is one of the best Euro games out there, if not one of the best games of the millennium. Well, it's 2017, so that maybe is not as majestic as it would mean in 999, but Splendor is an excellent game. This one, I hope to find something like that, Splendor with a calendar, but that wasn't the case. Then at the end, the game felt dry, felt less flavorful than I expected. It's a minor quibble with the theme. I don't expect Euro games to be very thematic. I don't know that Splendor is very thematic, but I like if at least the mechanics do not go directly against the theme. And yet the fact that to build a certain building may take a year or may take a month, depending on where you land, goes against the theme. How women recruit people, I don't want to get into that again. It's just weird. So those elements in which gameplay goes against the theme, I prefer Euro games that it's a little bit abstract, they may lack in detail, but do not necessarily oppose the theme so frontally. But the problem is that gameplay felt stiff, felt dry. I almost had the impression that if players analyze the initial board and then they go home and write a plan on what they're planning to do, and then you feed those into a computer, the computer can tell you who would win. Or actually just by looking at the things, oh yeah, you win, so why do we play this? Let's go out and get a beer instead. That also means that if you have played it as an experienced player, also because of the lack of any random element, if that player simply has seen something initial board, has a better plan than other people, and gets a good advantage at the beginning, that is going to be tough for the other players to catch up. Suppose, for example, the other players have some scattered people towards the end of the year, so they're ahead on the calendar, and you manage to create a nice powerful group of 3-4 workers there. Then you're gonna move 1 month ahead. You're gonna just mow down, like completely raise the top row, the top 2 rows, where everybody else still has strength to put together their groups. Having that small advantage, getting to do that a little early before other people do, can have a huge effect, and to me that is not always a good thing. I like things that, it's about seeing opportunity, grasping the right moment, and getting an advantage because of that, but it almost feels like you can break the game by making a couple of good decisions, and then The end game, unfortunately, it feels anticlimactic. It should be when the best things happen, but that's not necessarily the case, because you may have that it's absolutely clear who is going to win, that the players cannot possibly catch up, and there's still a couple of buildings on the board, and then you can choose to end the game early, which again is always a flaw, or you can go until the end and you simply see who goes for third or second or third position. But it can be entirely happen that the last couple of buildings are not interesting at all, and then you just grab them perfunctorily just because you want to see the game to the end. So this being said, after all this complaining, I don't want to give you a sense that this is a bad game. My problem is that it's an okay game. I expected this game to be much better, but again, my expectations only count up to a certain extent, because then we had to see what the game is in itself. To me, at the end, after disappointment, I can say that to me the game is an okay game. There's nothing particularly wrong with it. It's not super interesting, but it's not a broken game. It's not a terrible game. It's an okay game. It's a game that I may play in the future. I don't particularly look forward to, but again, not because of any intrinsic deal breaker in the game, but because if you look around this room, there are a lot of other games that do the same thing that this one does. Simple Eurogame style, played in under an hour, simple linear rules, that give me much more satisfaction. Splendor being one, several other examples being possible. So Samara is not a bad game, but with the competition with simple, good, flavorful, exciting Euro games out there, it's just not one that is particularly strong in that race, in that competition. It's a perfectly okay game, but in 2017, being okay is not nearly as good as it used to be, say, 10 years ago. So Samara, not bad, but unfortunately unremarkable in my opinion.